Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is the place where we take a huge stack of research biographies, literary analysis, historical context, and boil it all down to the one essential thing you really need to know.
And today we're talking about a writer whose life wasn't just interesting, it was, well, it was a wreck. A truly spectacular, chaotic, and perpetually indebted wreck.
We are diving into Honoré de Balzac.
The one and only.
Absolutely, the great French novelist and playwright. And before we even touch on the sweeping grandeur of his work, we have to start with the man's self-confidence.
Yeah.
It's almost unbelievable.
It really is. It's the ultimate writerly mic drop. So it's 1832. After years of writing under pseudonyms, years of failed projects, Balzac has this sudden, seismic realization about what his life's work is going to be.
And he doesn't just, jot it down in a notebook?
Oh, no. He races to his sister's apartment, bursts in, and proclaims, "I am about to become a genius."
That is just phenomenal, especially considering he was, more often than not, hiding from creditors at that point.
But he wasn't wrong, was he?
Not at all. That moment, that self-declaration, was the real conception of his colossal achievement, La Comédie humaine.
The human comedy.
Right. And this isn't just one book. I mean, it's a whole sequence of novels.
It's a universe. 91 of them, either completed or planned. It's this absolutely dense, panoramic sweep of French society in the decades right after Napoleon.
He documents everyone, from the lowest peasant and the struggling clerk, all the way up to the great financiers and the aristocracy.
At every single level.
So our mission today, for you listening, is to give you the shortcut. The shortcut to understanding why Balzac is really unanimously seen as one of the founders of realism in European literature.
And more than that, we're extracting the core insight here, which is that Balzac built this incredible monument to society, literally out of the wreckage of his own life.
We need to see how his genuinely difficult, dramatic, and failure-ridden personal life, his debt, his legal training, his endless romantic drama, how all of that directly fueled the unfiltered, detailed picture of society that defines his work.
He had to observe the world so acutely because, well, he was constantly at war with it.
Okay, let's unpack this. And we have to start at the very beginning, because the creation of Balzac the writer really starts with the creation of the name Balzac itself. He wasn't born Honoré de Balzac. He was born plain Honoré Balzac.
Yeah.
And even that name was basically a piece of social engineering by his father.
Yeah.
Tell us about him, Bernard-François Balzac.
Right, Balzac. He was the son of an artisan from the southwest of France, a true self-made man. The sources say he set off for Paris in 1760 with just a single coin in his pocket.
Driven by just ferocious ambition.
Completely. He didn't just climb the social ladder, he sprinted up it. He eventually rises to this really prestigious position, secretary to the King's Council.
And if you're climbing, you need to refine the image. Balzac sounds a bit rustic. Balzac sounds more established, more noble.
So the father changes the name,
Yeah.
and the son, Honoré, takes that aspiration and just supercharges it.
That's where the famous little particle de comes in.
Exactly. Honoré just starts adding it himself, de Balzac. With no official recognition, no royal decree, he was literally self-ennobling through his pen name.
A huge declaration of his own artistic worth.
And he was completely open about it. In 1830, he wrote that the aristocracy and authority of talent are more substantial than the aristocracy of names and material power.
So he's arguing that his hard work, his brilliance, that was his true most of nobility, way more than any inherited title.
And that's a crucial insight for you right there. He's steeped in the language of the old aristocracy, but at the same time, he's embracing this new revolutionary idea that your achievement is what gives you status.
That tension between the old order and the new capitalist meritocracy is basically the engine of La Comédie humaine.
It is, and his family life was just as defined by this kind of social climbing and, frankly, financial calculation. His mother, Aunt Charlotte Laure Salambier, came from a wealthy Parisian family of haberdashers.
A commercial background, a good dowry.
And a stark contrast in age. She was 18, his father was 50. The sources are pretty brutal about this. They're clear it was a purely transactional marriage. She knew she was basically a reward for her husband's professional services to a family friend. She was not in love with him.
So from the moment he's born, Balzac's entire world is built on money, ambition, and a profound lack of emotional warmth.
The exact elements he would later expose with surgical precision in his novels.
And that lack of warmth, it started immediately.
Oh, yeah. As an infant, he was sent away to a wet nurse. He spent 4 years away from home. When he and his sister Laure finally came back, their parents kept them at a, quote, frosty distance.
This isn't just biographical trivia. It's the genesis of the cold analytical observer.
Right. His novel Le Lys dans la Vallée has this cruel governess, Miss Caroline, who was modeled directly on his own caregiver. These early deprivations gave him this intense, critical distance. Home wasn't a refuge, it was a subject for analysis.
And the isolation just got worse. At age 10, he was sent off to the Vendôme Oratorian Grammar School for 7 years.
And his father, determined to instill this hard work ethic, intentionally gave him very little money. So he became an object of ridicule among his wealthier classmates.
He's learning about class disparity not from a book, but from daily humiliation.
And his response to the school's rigid learning style was just rebellion. He couldn't do rote memorization, so he was constantly being punished.
The punishment being confinement in the alcove, a disciplinary cell.
And get this, the school janitor later recalled having the, quote, honor of escorting him to the dungeon more than 100 times.
More than 100 times. That's astonishing. It's almost every few weeks for 7 years.
It is. But here's where the personal failure flips into intellectual triumph. The confinement, ironically, gave him total freedom to read.
So while he's being punished, he's educating himself.
He devoured the school's library. Everything. Literature, philosophy, history, physics. He even read through dictionaries for, in his words, indescribable delight.
Just for the knowledge itself.
That boundless appetite for facts, for cataloging society, that's what drove La Comédie humaine. He even put that exact habit into his novel Louis Lambert.
But all that manic intellectual energy, it had a physical cost.
Definitely. He returned home from school suffering from a sort of a coma, which he blamed on intellectual congestion. It's a theme he'd explore later, ambition literally consuming the body.
And the despair became very real. The sources confirm that between 1814 and 1816, he attempted suicide on a bridge over the River Loire.
So this was a young man marked by neglect, isolation, and genuine despair long before he was a famous writer.
And yet his parents were still determined he'd have a safe, respectable career. So in 1816, he goes to the Sorbonne to study law.
And that part was actually intellectually stimulating. He studied under influential thinkers who encouraged independent thought, but then came the practical side of it.
The apprenticeship.
And this was the single most important, albeit negative, training of his entire life. 3 years in a law office.
Let's pause on this because it's absolutely vital. He wasn't just any kind of lawyer. He trained first as an avoué and then as a notaire. We need to be clear about what these jobs were in 19th century Paris.
An avoué was like a solicitor. He prepared the cases, the bankruptcies, the foreclosures, the financial disputes, all the messy stuff.
And a notaire was even more central to the machinery of money.
Much more. They handled contracts, wills, mortgages, marriage settlements, real estate. Basically every document that moved money and property around.
So Balzac wasn't just reading law books. He was watching the naked transaction of human ambition and failure every single day.
He saw who was rising, who was falling. He processed the paperwork that documented every hidden family secret, every moral compromise.
He basically had a front row seat to the engine room of Parisian society.
He said it perfectly in his novel Le Notaire. He wrote that a young law clerk sees the oily wheels of every fortune, the hideous wrangling of heirs over corpses not yet cold, the human heart grappling with the penal code.
Wow. The oily wheels of every fortune. That's it. That's the birth of literary realism right there.
Seeing society not as some grand ideal, but as this morally hideous machine.
Which is why, when the notaire he worked for, a man named Passez, offered to make Balzac his successor, a stable, lucrative, respectable job for life, he said no.
He refused. He said he wouldn't be a clerk, a machine, a writing school hack. I should be like everyone else.
A total betrayal of his family's plans for him.
The family was furious, but they let him live in a garret in Paris, a tiny room, furnished in the most Spartan fashion on a starvation allowance.
So he went from observing the machine to being crushed by it. He was now living the life of the struggling artist he would write about so many times.
But success did not come quickly. His first attempts at writing were, well, they were spectacular failures.
He tried an opera libretto, a tragedy in verse called Cromwell.
Which his family read and universally declared to be awful.
So he pivots. Desperate for money, the constant theme of his life, he starts churning out commercial fiction under pseudonyms.
Right. Horace de Saint-Aubin. These were the potboilers, designed to be sensational and sell fast.
Like Vicaire des Ardennes, which was banned for being too scandalous.
Exactly. The critics called them curiously, interestingly, almost enthrallingly bad.
But they were essential training, weren't they? That habit of writing under immense financial pressure.
It was his boot camp. Without the potboilers, he never could have produced La Comédie humaine.
And at the same time, he's failing as a writer. He's failing even more spectacularly as a businessman.
This is the great paradox. The man who understood the oily wheels of fortune better than anyone alive was a terrible businessman.
He tried publishing cheap one-volume classics. That failed. The books were sold as scrap paper.
Then he tried to build a printing business and then a type foundry.
All with grand ambition and zero practical sense.
He had no capital, no experience. The sources show he racked up massive debts, 50,000 francs owed just to his mother by 1828.
That's a huge amount of money for the time.
It's enough to buy a very comfortable apartment in Paris. It's years of income for a successful professional. And that suffocating debt, which he carried for most of his life, shaped everything he wrote.
His critique of money wasn't intellectual. It was visceral. It was a lived reality.
Absolutely. His fascination with misers and avarice in books like Eugénie Grandet, that came from hiding from bailiffs, not from reading philosophy.
And he never learned his lesson. Even after he was famous, he was still chasing these get-rich-quick schemes.
He traveled all the way to Sardinia, hoping to reprocess slag from ancient Roman mines. Of a ridiculous idea.
And later he had this scheme to buy 20,000 acres of oak wood in Ukraine and ship it to France.
He was always chasing the one big score that would free him from the grind of writing for money.
So the man who would become the great documentarian of society's pursuit of wealth was himself a frantic, chaotic speculator. And every failure just gave him more raw material for his work.
And that cycle of ambition and failure leads us right to 1832. To that moment in his sister's apartment where he realizes he doesn't need to escape his world. He needs to capture it whole.
That's the conception of the whole project, this enormous series that would paint a panoramic portrait of all aspects of society.
By this point, he'd had his first real success under his own name, Le Chouan, in 1829.
That was his passage into the promised land. It proved he could do serious literature, and then the masterpieces started coming quickly.
La Peau de Chagrin, The Wild Ass's Skin, in 1831. It's this fantastic story about a magical piece of skin that grants wishes but shrinks each time, consuming the owner's life force.
A perfect metaphor for the ambition and burnout he saw all around him.
And in 1833, we get Eugénie Grandet, his first real bestseller, a harrowing story of a young woman whose spirit is just crushed by her miserly father. It is the perfect distillation of that avarice he knew so well.
And then in 1835, Le Père Goriot, which is often seen as the keystone of the whole series.
It's basically King Lear, but set in a dingy Parisian boarding house in the 1820s. A father who gives everything to his daughters and is abandoned by them. It's this bitter rage against a society where money has replaced love.
And these works establish him as this new thing, a literary realist. He was influenced by romantics like Walter Scott, but he took a radical turn.
He wanted to depict human existence through cold, hard particulars, a sociological approach to fiction.
He even said it himself. He believed that details alone will henceforth determine the merit of works.
And he proved it on the page. His descriptions of decor, of clothing, of architecture, they're exhaustive, but they're not just descriptive flair, they're functional.
They tell you everything. A character's social standing, their credit rating, their moral state.
Think about the famous opening of Le Père Goriot, the description of the pension Vauquer. He describes the wallpaper cheap, faded, peeling, stained with grease in such minute detail.
The wallpaper itself has a history. It speaks of the identities of those living inside.
Right, and that's why someone like Émile Zola later called Balzac the father of the naturalist novel. He saw the world through clear glass. He connected human behavior directly to the environment. Poverty isn't an abstract idea. It's the physical reality of cheap, greasy wallpaper defining your life.
And beyond the setting, his great innovation was his characters. They were complex, morally ambiguous, fully human.
He was aiming for this high psychological realism. He said writers should use whatever literary device seems capable of giving the greatest intensity of life to their characters.
And his characters manage this incredible balancing act. They represent a social type, the ambitious young man from the provinces, the criminal mastermind, the fallen aristocrat. But they're never just cartoons. They're messy and individual.
And the mechanism that elevates the whole project, that turns it from a collection of novels into a single interconnected world, is his use of recurring characters.
Right. Characters like Eugène de Rastignac, the ambitious social climber, or the terrifying criminal Vautrin. They pop up in dozens of different books.
This was revolutionary for fiction at the time. When a character reappears, they bring their entire history with them. They emerge from the privacy of their own lives. It solidifies the sense that Balzac's fictional Paris is a real, living, breathing world.
It was so powerful that it blurred the lines between fiction and reality for his readers.
Yeah.
The anecdote about Oscar Wilde is the perfect example.
Oh, it's incredible. When the character Lucien de Rubempré dies in one of the novels, Wilde confessed it was, quote, one of the greatest tragedies of my life. It haunts me in my moments of pleasure. I remember it when I laugh.
People were grieving fictional characters as if they were real people.
They were real to them, and what drives these characters is this intense energy. Balzac was fascinated by the pseudoscience of his day, like Mesmer's theories on animal magnetism.
The kind of life force.
Exactly, a nervous and fluid force, and his characters are just burning with it. They're constantly struggling against society, and they often burn themselves out in the process. It's that energy that is literally consumed in Le Peau de Chagrin.
And the final piece of his realism is the character of place, particularly Paris.
He was meticulous. He would walk the city for hours, studying neighborhoods, taking notes. His descriptions can go on for 15 or 20 pages of intricate detail.
Because for him, Paris wasn't just a backdrop. He said, the streets of Paris possess human qualities.
It was the artificial metropolis, this labyrinth where man-made chaos had overwhelmed nature. It became the model for every great city novelist who followed, from Dickens in London to Dostoevsky in St. Petersburg.
The critic Peter Brooks put it perfectly. Realism is nothing if not urban. The story of the young man coming to the city to make his fortune. That's the central story of Balzac's world.
And here's another fascinating link to his own chaotic life. Some of his most tormenting characters were written while he was staying at the Château de Sachet.
Okay.
This estate was owned by his friend, Jean de Margon, who was also his mother's lover and the father of her youngest child.
Wait, what? His mother was having a long-term affair with the man whose house Balzac used as a writing retreat.
Exactly. Even the physical place he created from was tangled up in the same web of domestic secrets and moral ambiguity that defined his novels. He could never escape it.
Which leads us right into the sheer intensity of his personal life, which was obviously required to produce this mountain of work. We have to talk about his work habits. They're legendary and, frankly, terrifying.
They were inhuman, completely. His standard schedule was to eat a light meal in the afternoon, sleep until midnight, then get up at 1 a.m. and write nonstop until 8 in the morning.
Fueled by coffee.
Innumerable cups of black coffee. The sources suggest his consumption was so prolific, some say over 50 cups a day, though that's debated, that modern researchers think it was a factor in his death. He was literally burning himself out for his art.
And the physical pace was incredible. Writing with a quill, he could compose at a rate that's like 30 words per minute on a modern typewriter.
But the real obsession was in the revision process.
He was a publisher's nightmare, right?
Oh, a total nightmare. He'd send the pages to the printer, get the proofs back, and then just cover them with changes, additions, rewrites, and then do it again and again.
It cost a fortune in printing fees.
A fortune. And it meant the finished book was often vastly different from the first draft. It speaks to this mind that was just constantly running, never satisfied.
And that perpetual motion, that intensity, it defined his romantic life, too. It was as complex as any of his plots.
To put it mildly, let's start with Maria du Fresnay in 1833. She was 24, a writer, and married to an older man.
A classic Balzacian setup.
It was an illicit affair, and in 1834 she gave birth to their secret daughter, Marie Caroline, and significantly, Maria was the person to whom he dedicated Eugénie Grandet. His lovers were often his muses.
And there's another footnote here, right? That he was also listed in the Paris police records.
Of known homosexuals, yes, indicating at least suspicion that he was attracted to men as well. His emotional life was a secret history, just like the ones in his novels.
But the central love of his life was someone else entirely, someone he courted for years by letter.
Countess Ewelina Hańska, a Polish aristocrat living near Kiev, his sweetest dream.
And it started completely anonymously.
In 1832, she sends him a letter from Odessa, signed only L'étranger, the foreigner, criticizing his work. And a 15-year correspondence begins with him placing a classified ad in a newspaper, hoping she'll see it.
She was also in a marriage of convenience to a man 20 years older.
It's the same pattern. Their letters are this incredible dance of passion, intellectual debate, and proper decorum, all conducted across thousands of miles.
And after her husband died in 1841, Balzac finally went to pursue her in person.
He visited her in St. Petersburg in 1843, and despite some serious competition, including from the composer Franz Liszt, he won her heart.
But getting to the altar was fraught with classic Balzac problems.
Of course, financial collapse, his health was failing, and he even had to get approval from Tsar Nicholas I, who wasn't keen on one of his noblewomen marrying a foreigner.
They finally got permission and were married in 1850. A tragic fulfillment of a lifetime of waiting.
It really was. The wedding was in March 1850 in what is now Ukraine, and the journey itself, a 10-hour carriage ride, just physically devastated him.
He was already in a state of collapse.
Completely. They arrived back in Paris on his 51st birthday, May 20th. His wife reported he was in a state of extreme weakness.
And just 5 months later.
5 months after finally achieving the marriage and stability he'd craved his whole life, Honoré de Balzac died on August 18, 1850. Gangrene associated with congestive heart failure.
His mother was at his deathbed, but his new wife, Eve, had gone to bed. A final, profoundly human moment of attachment.
And the funeral was the ultimate social event. Victor Hugo gave the eulogy, declaring, "A nation in mourning for a man of genius." Almost every writer in Paris was there. Dumas, father and son. A suitably dramatic end for a life lived in service of drama.
Okay, this is where Balzac, the objective observer, becomes almost shocking. Because the man who wrote the blueprint for literary realism, who captured the cold, hard reality of bourgeois France, was politically an extreme conservative.
He was a legitimist.
Meaning he supported the royal house of Bourbon, he believed in the divine right of the king, and rejected the new, more liberal July monarchy that came in after the 1830 revolution.
He was looking backward, idealizing the old aristocratic order. He was heavily influenced by counter-revolutionary philosophers.
He once said that when Louis XVI was beheaded, the revolution beheaded in his person all fathers of families.
He saw the breakdown of political order as the destruction of the family itself, and he had this lifelong admiration for the Catholic Church.
Right. In the preface to La Comédie humaine, he calls it a complete system for the repression of the depraved tendencies of man.
And, crucially, the most powerful element of social order.
So here's the first huge contradiction. The writer who spent his career meticulously cataloging human corruption, greed, lust, ambition, was convinced that only the strictest, most repressive institutions could keep it all in check.
Exactly. He chronicled the rise of the financial bourgeoisie, but politically, he despised them. His work is a monumental record of the very society he thought was morally bankrupt.
And, surprise, surprise, Balzac the politician was just as much a failure as Balzac the businessman.
He genuinely saw himself as a potential political leader. He called for a young and vigorous man to mediate things, not so subtly suggesting himself.
But a freak accident in 1832, he slipped on the street and cracked his head, prevented him from actually standing for election.
So political action was closed to him, only observation remained.
He tried journalism to have a more direct impact, but that failed too. He ran a couple of magazines.
And they both folded almost immediately. The market rejected his attempts to impose political order just like it rejected his businesses. He was only successful when he was depicting the chaos, not when he was trying to control it.
And this brings us to the most stunning paradox of all. The thing that confirms his objective genius. Because he was such a keen, unflinching observer of class and money and ambition, his work became essential reading for his bitterest ideological opponents.
We're talking about Marxists and socialists, the founders of modern political thought. They used Balzac's novels as their primary textbook on how 19th century capitalism actually worked.
It's the ultimate intellectual twist. Despite Balzac's fervent monarchist views, Friedrich Engels, co-founder of Marxism, said he learned more from Balzac than from all the professional historians, economists, and statisticians put together.
Karl Marx references Balzac in Das Kapital. And the anecdote about Leon Trotsky is just incredible.
What's that?
Trotsky would famously read Balzac's novels right in the middle of meetings of the Central Committee.
Seriously.
To the annoyance of his colleagues. He was reading fiction for factual political truth.
Think about the weight of that. The very men who wanted to overthrow the society Balzac politically revered were using his work as the key document, showing exactly how that system operated and why it needed to be destroyed.
His political intentions became totally irrelevant. The truth and the scope of his observations were simply too powerful, too accurate to be ignored by anyone.
And that kind of objective, comprehensive truth just fundamentally changed the course of literature. Balzac didn't just write great books, he basically invented the template for the modern social novel.
You can trace a direct line from Balzac to pretty much every major realist, naturalist, and even early modernist writer of the next 100 years.
Let's start with Henry James, the great American novelist who was obsessed with European society and psychology.
James called Balzac really the father of us all. He admired Balzac's sheer ambition to portray what he called a beast with 100 claws society in all its terror and glory.
But James had his critiques too.
Oh, he did. He felt that the artist of the Comédie humaine is half smothered by the historian. But that's also a compliment, right? It acknowledges that Balzac was so successful at being a social historian that the facts sometimes overwhelmed the art. The debt is still profound.
And then there's the constant comparison to Charles Dickens. One is the French Dickens, the other the English Balzac.
Balzac was a huge influence on Dickens, especially in his use of vivid cityscapes and characters that represent social types.
And what about Flaubert, the ultimate prose stylist?
Flaubert was hugely influenced by Balzac's commitment to detail and his unvarnished look at bourgeois life, but Flaubert's critique is legendary.
What a man he would have been had he known how to write.
Exactly. The perfectionist in Flaubert couldn't handle Balzac's sometimes rough prose. But even he had to admit the sheer power of the vision, and Flaubert's great novel, L'Éducation sentimentale, owes a clear structural debt to Balzac's illusions perdues.
And we come back to Émile Zola,
who declared Balzac the definitive father of the naturalist novel. Zola saw that Balzac was the first to really get that environment is destiny, that your behavior is tied to your class, your heredity, your physical surroundings.
And finally, Marcel Proust, another giant.
Proust adored Balzac. He studied him carefully and even adopted some of his techniques, like what's called retrospective illumination.
Which is what, exactly?
It's when you reveal a character's backstory or their full complexity long after they've first been introduced. It deepens the sense that the world is real and ongoing. Proust used that to layer memory and history onto his characters.
So the influence is just everywhere.
And beyond the literary giants, there are these great little stories about his chaotic working life that just underline his constant, desperate hustle.
Like the idea of the vanishing man.
Right, the idea that he was always on the move, escaping creditors, and that the only settled, stable home he could ever build was the world of the human comedy itself. His fictional world was the complete opposite of his real one.
And then there's that ghostwriting anecdote from 1838. It's pure, cynical Balzac.
He ghostwrote a book called Maximes et Pensées de Napoléon for a former hatter.
A former hatter. Why?
For the hustle. The goal wasn't historical accuracy. It was to get the hatter the Legion of Honor medal by dedicating the book to King Louis Philippe and flattering him excessively.
And did it work?
It worked. The hatter got his medal, and Balzac got 4,000 francs. But here's the kicker. Balzac later admitted he just invented some of the Napoleon maxims.
He made them up.
Completely. And critics noted that the invented ones seem surprisingly absolutist, even for Napoleon. It's the ultimate Balzacian scheme-monetizing reputation and political cynicism to pay off a debt.
His impact, of course, continues today. His novels are constantly being adapted for film and TV.
The stories are timeless because the themes greed, ambition, social climbing are timeless. And he pops up in weird places, like in François Truffaut's film The 400 Blows, where the young hero plagiarizes Balzac and then lights a small fire in his honor.
And, of course, he's a permanent fixture in Paris. The sculptor Auguste Rodin created that incredible monument to Balzac, this powerful, brooding bronze statue that stands in the city today.
So we circle all the way back to our central truth. Honoré de Balzac was a spectacular failure at almost everything practical he ever tried.
Businessman, politician, lawyer, even a successful romantic in the end. He married his great love 5 months before he died.
But every debt, every failure, every sleepless night fueled that obsessive, detailed literary project. He took the ugly reality he saw in those law offices, the oily wheels of every fortune and the hideous wrangling of heirs, and forged it into the grandest, most objective picture of a society ever attempted.
His work proves that to really understand a society, you have to observe its chaos, its contradictions, its materialism. You have to be willing to look through that clear glass, no matter how harsh the reflection is.
He turned personal struggle into unparalleled artistic scope.
And that leaves us with our final provocative thought for you to take away. Honoré de Balzac was a fervent monarchist, a committed Catholic. He believed the old aristocratic order was essential. Yet his work became the factual foundation for the founders of communism.
So what does that tell us about the power of unfiltered observation?
That a writer's political intentions can be completely overridden by the sheer truth and scope of the world he creates.
The world he observed was more honest than the world he wished for.
Food for thought. That was a truly deep dive into the genius and the chaos of Honoré de Balzac. We'll see you next time.